Hello and welcome everyone to another programming tutorial this time. So not sound design and nothing about my new, well, a little bit about my new release Overdrive Re-Neo, but mostly a programming tutorial because now we are going to copy files from one place to another in a way that makes a lot of sense. And I think that's an important topic. What you see here is the application fork, because fork is like a Git client with a GUI, so that you don't have to deal with the Git commands manually, you know, but just have to select the branch and the commit or whatever that is called, and then it will load that one and then you are on that something. But this video is not going to be about Git and also not about fork, but actually about the situation where you have multiple different projects and you want to sort of merge them with each other. Now, why would you want to do that? If you haven't seen my new release, Overdrive Re-Neo, I would highly encourage you to check that out before we go on so that you know what I'm talking about. But I will also briefly say what happened here. So let's say we have a project and it's called P because it's like the default project, PT for project template. So this is the template for all of the projects that I make and stuff. So now we are basically copying that project over and then we make a new project, and this project is my new release called Overdrive Re-Neo. And this is the new project, so it's a copy of that. Now we have made some modifications to that. Let's call that Neo++ because it's now a little bit more than just the default project. But now we want to merge that back into the default project. Of course, not everything, because a default project is not like a plugin that does a specific thing, but it's more like a generalization for all of the kind of stuff that you always need for plugins. So we don't just want to mindlessly copy this over to this, but we want to select in which way it should copy certain things. Because sometimes when you're making plugins, you run into problems and then you have to build new structures that would also fit into the default template, or you fix something from the default template that you didn't see was a problem before, but then once you're actually using it, you see that it was a problem all along. Now, in order to do that, I will now use the application Beyond Compare, which was advised to me when I asked some people on which software to use for comparing different files and stuff. As you can see, I already used it before when comparing the so-called default project, that's my template, with the last plugin that I released, Grid Shifter. And now I will do that again, but with Overdrive Re-Neo, and you will be part of this, and I will probably edit this video a lot because otherwise it will be too long, but you know, the highlights and stuff. Now the first thing that I'll try to do here is trying to find out if there is dark mode or something. I didn't do that last time, but I just realized that would make a lot of sense. Okay, I guess I have to add a new Sitzung. Actually, can I put this on English for everyone? So a Sitzung is probably some sort of project, and this says comparing folders. So now we are in the comparing folders mode, and I guess I can now load folders here. So this is the source folder. I've seen that in a tutorial. And I can now go ahead and select my Overdrive Re-Neo folder, but only the sources basically, because the other stuff is definitely the same, or at least not worth checking. Now we are comparing that with the default project that wants to be changed. I just realized that I'm looking pretty shitty with this white mode application on my screen, because that way my face gets very white, and yeah. Please, everyone who makes applications, don't make light mode. But I don't want to hate about that now, because this application is in fact very useful, and you know, it's just a UI decision that was made, but everything else here is very cool, and I hope I can show you that. So now this is the default project's source folder. Now I select diff. I only want to see what's different in every file. And now I go into the subfolders and I see there are already some differences. I just double clicked on that and I just saw the difference here is that there is just one function more than before. And I copy that and then I save with ctrl-s and I leave the file. And now I can do the same with the CPP, which also has this method in it now. I think everything else stayed the same. So, whoopsie. So, saving. Now this already finished the first folder where there were differences. Now going on to the audio one. So what happened here? I added some more constants like half p and invert of half p. Makes sense to have them, so I add them. I added a new type def of decibels, juice decibels, because I used decibels the first time in my default project here. And I added a new function for getting the RMS values from a buffer of a certain size. That is also a useful free function to have. If you're wondering why there are so few audio utils in there yet, that's just because I have not made a lot of plugins with my template yet. I do have more audio utils, I just didn't copy them there yet. I only do that when I really need them, so that I don't, you know, put too much stuff in there like that. So now what was the difference here? Is there a difference? I don't see the difference. Mixer. Okay, so I changed some of the layout of the pre-processed definitions. I suppose that I just have to do it the way that I rewrote it, because there was a mistake in the preprocessor defines at some point. And yeah, it's sometimes hard to see immediately if everything is correct when it comes to these preprocessor definitions, because they are like mixing the C language with the C++ language, and then everything looks a little bit weird. But we will still see if everything works correctly at the end when we are actually trying to run the project. And then if something was copied a little bit weirdly, we can still fix that. Now there is a file that is just completely not existing. Actually, these two did not exist in the original project. So I will just copy them completely from left to right. Yeah. Actually, I'm a little bit surprised how fast I'm progressing with this, considering that, you know, I was working on a full plugin and made a lot of weird little changes. One would have to think that I have to look closer at all this kind of stuff to see the issues. Now this is my knob CPP. I added some functionality to the on double click function, and someone reported a bug there that sometimes the on double click function does not correctly register the functionality. I think I know what the issue is. I might debug that later, and then I will have to copy it over to the other project again. But for now I will just copy this method. Now there were a lot of changes down here. I think it's because I copied a lot of stuff from one whole header to another and CPP file, so that shouldn't be surprising now. And in some other file there will be all this kind of stuff erased from. So now for the knob probably the same. Yep. Now low level. Of course there are a lot of changes on the low level, because the low level component is the one where the individual stuff happens that is different for every plugin. Like here we had the muffle, drive and pan and scrap parameters. We painted them on a specific place in the layout. But the thing is that this is my default project, so I definitely don't just want to copy that over, as it's not really what makes a default project default. So this is definitely something that I will not change. And it's a good example of why you can't just copy the whole project. Now this is the file where I erased all that stuff. So yeah, I want to copy the fact that I erased stuff. Does that make sense? Sometimes I just change the layout because at some point I just decided that my general code style should be to have the brackets after the head of the method, because I feel like that gives me a slightly more relaxed feeling when I'm looking at it. Just wondering why when we are selecting div it... Oh, I have to click it again so that it reloads. Okay. Now the next thing is the parameter class, in which there are also some preprocessor defined differences. Of course, the new parameters that I will not copy now, a new unit which is called panning that I definitely copy. And what changed here? There was a lot of stuff in here, the namespace of this kind of stuff, but I put it here, so it makes sense that it was removed from here and then copied to here. Yeah, That was needed for something. I forgot for what, but it's definitely needed. This is the unit of the pen, percent, just like percent. And I changed something about what makes a parameter, which is the fact that the mod depth logged default should be false instead of true. That's actually a good example of what I said in the beginning, where you're just writing something and you don't expect that to be a problem. And then once you actually use it, you notice how it becomes a problem. And the reason why I didn't notice that before was when you're only debugging your plugin in standalone from Visual Studio or whatever IDE, then of course it will always load from the last state that was saved in the plugin, unless you actively remove that state. But even if you do that, it will save a new state when you are closing the plugin. And then once you open it again, you will load from that state. So there is not really a way to fully reset it. The only way to debug a plugin, like without state, is to load it in a DAW. But you don't always debug in a DAW because that takes longer. So I didn't see that this value that should actually have been false was true. And it only was exposed to me when I started debugging more in the DAW. Now I added some safety features here, like when a patch is being loaded, then the value that is loaded from the loaded patch is always snapped to a legal value before being converted to 0 or 1. Because I notice when I'm changing the range of a parameter and then a preset's loaded where the value falls out of that range, then this would crash. Of course, that is not a problem when you are in the default template where you're not changing anything about the parameters because you're debugging other stuff. But once you're actually working more with parameters because you're actually making a plugin, then you notice that stuff like that is very useful suddenly. Now this is the string to val function for the panning. Of course I need that. And there is also a value to string function for the panning. A new function dedicated for making panning parameters. Now there are some files left. Editor. Editor has no changes. Info. The info has some changes because there was some new things I just want to do. So they come into the to-do list. Now this is going to be tricky again because this is the processor. Maybe let's maybe start with a header file as that's a little bit easier. Do we want to generally import the overdrive reneo class just in case that we need it? No, we don't. Do we want to have pink noise in this for generally? Let me think of it. Does every plugin need something with auto gain in it? Not entirely sure. So let's just ignore that for now, not copy that. Overdrive prepare is not needed when we don't have overdrive. And then the changes in how the parameters are loaded and then used for DSP processing, also not copyable. Now I'm clicking on diff again, just to see what was still different, and we see it's just the low level and the processor and some stuff in the parameters. So that's basically just what's left from this being a full plugin and this being a template. So I think that's it. And now the next step would be to test if everything still works. Do I want to close everything? All tabs, always all tabs, I guess. Finally dark mode again. Thank God. I don't believe in God, but thank God. Or more like I believe that God is something more complicated than person. But anyway. So now we can see the things that we have copied here definitely show up. The to-do comments that I just added. That means that we should have the updated project here in front of us. So now let's try to run this and see how far we get. Okay, so this loads. It has the parameters, the default parameters of my template and not of the plugin that I made. Everything looks like it works very well. Here's my unfinished spline editor that was not part of Overdrive Reneo. So yeah, that's definitely my default project, my template. Has all the new features like the Manifest of Wisdom that I still have to make a separate video about. And yeah, so basically that's it. Okay, so the moral of this story is if you are trying to get into plugin development or probably all kinds of development where you are developing a specific thing over and over again but with tweaks, then you should consider, you know, finding some way of having a place where you add and add more and more stuff, just like my template project, because then you can make new projects quickly and they work more or less, and every time something doesn't work, you can debug that, and then you can add these changes to your template. So every time you're using your template itself is getting stronger and stronger. It's kind of like a rebound effect or something, which is pretty cool. And I think that is the moral of this video. And while we are speaking about morals, Beyond Compare is a commercial software. I'm still on the trial, and the trial is programmed in a really cool way. It's a 30-day trial, but the 30 days, they don't just go down while you're not using it. So it's not that you are using it once and then you lose it because you don't have to compare something the next 30 days. No, actually I'm still on day 2. So theoretically, I could now compare 30 projects. So in my case, 30 plugins before I'm running out of the trial, because no one is ever going to need more than 1 day for one compare. And that's kind of insane, because that's a lot of compares before you actually are asked to pay something for the application. And I really like people who are that generous. I think generosity should be much more widespread in our society. So I definitely consider buying that program before the trial runs out, if I don't see an application that is even more useful in that regard. Please let me know in the comments if you have any thoughts about all this and your experiences with project version management or something. And yeah,